People first organizations will win in the future of work.
Your only real asset is your people.
We all want purpose-driven work.
HR-led organization is the
I'm
future.
sorry, but leaders don't lead empty desks and empty shop floors.
Welcome to the People Strategy Leaders Show. I'm your host, Sri Chellappa, founder and president of Engagedly, and a serial entrepreneur in technology, films, and music. This is where we talk to people leaders, business strategists, and organizational savants about leading in the time of change. What is working, what is not working, and more importantly, what we should be thinking about. Stick around to the end of the show. We will reveal how you can be our next guest. And now, let's engage. Hello and welcome to People Strategy Leaders Podcast. I am Sri Chellappa, your host. Today I'm joined with Adam Boddison. Adam Boddison currently serves as the Chief Executive of the Association of Project Management, APM, the chartered membership body for project profession. Throughout his work at APM, Adam spearheads initiatives aimed at advancing the project profession to the highest standards. Beyond his work with APM, Adam brings diverse experience to the table. A notable example being his tenure as CEO of NASN, National Association of Special Educational Needs, where he spearheaded a turnaround and growth strategy resulting in tenfold increase in membership over 5 years. Adam also served as a director of the Center for Professional Education at the University of Warwick. His diverse skills set also extends to clinical hypnotherapy, showcasing his multidisciplinary approach to education and leadership. You've got quite a bit of experience there, Adam. Welcome to the show.
No, thank you for having me. Yes, it's been a varied career up to this point, and long may that continue.
Yeah, I know one of the things that I found very interesting in your background is this whole, your background is a lot around project management, but it's also about executive leadership. And typically we don't conflate the two too much. We talk about project managers, and then there's executive leadership, people who drive vision and change and push the team forward and things like that. And the topic that we were discussing, because they looked at it separate, they shouldn't be. And one of the things that we were talking about, how many strategic initiatives fail because maybe of that. So can you talk about, really talking about from a CEO or executive leadership perspective, why do most or many strategic initiatives actually fail to fully realize their potential?
Yes, thank you. Really great question. I think one of the things I would reflect on is before I joined the Association of Project Management, I confess that I was ignorant to some of what I'm about to talk about myself in previous CEO and executive leadership roles. And having joined the organization, I think I've been on this journey, a realization journey, to understand that project management it isn't only a technical specialist area. It does have a generalist strategic execution aspect to it as well, which I think could be really helpful for many leaders. However, I think the profession itself has somewhat of an image problem. It's seen as being very specialist, very technical, and actually some of the roles are, but lots of the roles are about delivery of change. And if there's one thing I know about most businesses, is that leaders, particularly chief executives, are being asked to deliver major change in a way that wasn't the case maybe 30, 40 years ago, where probably lots of leadership roles were about mostly business as usual and maybe a small amount of change. I think that's reversed now. So if we are saying that most leaders are asked to deliver change and to execute their strategies effectively, then I think project management has huge value to add. I think one of the things we talked about was this idea that some leaders think of everything as a project that they're doing. And that's a really healthy way, I think, of approaching delivery, particularly strategy delivery. I think the bit for me that often is missing when it comes to not just chief executives, but the C-suite more broadly, is then recognizing that if we see it as a project, we can actually deploy formal project management tools, techniques, and strategies that will help us to be more effective. And that's, I think, where the gap is. I think even the word management, I think itself is a problem. Over the years, if you look at all of the research around leadership itself has become good thing. Everybody wants to be a leader. There's lots of leadership development programs and courses. Management's kind of got a bit of bad rep now, right? And project management has got a double problem because of the image thing I talked about before. So I think that's why it gets left on the table. But I think many leaders would benefit from deploying those tools and techniques to improve strategy execution in their businesses.
Yeah, I think this is a great point, actually, because many of them read too many leadership books and leadership podcasts, listen to a lot of leadership podcasts and articles, and think about leadership as driving a vision, presenting a vision, communicating your vision. All of that is true. But I add one thing to that personally from my own experience of being one and observing other leaders. The best leaders were at some point really good managers. And the good managers mean they're focused on executing something that might be very mundane, may not be necessarily something visionary and earth-shaking changes, but they knew how to progress through executing and managing people directly, managing a project or different activities with them, and making sure they were getting done. And then not every good manager can be leader, but every good leader, I believe, needs to be a good manager or has to have been a good manager and need to have good management techniques. And that's where you can have the great strategic vision. You can have brilliant ideas, right? And as you said, that you see this big vacuum in a market and you want to go and conquer that vacuum because there's a white space that you can go after. Somebody might have that, a good leader might have those ideas. But if you don't execute on it fast enough, that's a problem. Is that why you would say most strategic initiatives fail, because they have this vision and then they can't figure out how to get it done?
I think that's part of it, but I think the ideas themselves could be improved if you have some concept of what's possible in terms of delivery and what's not. Because sometimes I think there's this disconnect that happens in organizations with the leader that comes up with this great idea, and probably those who have to execute on that idea saying, oh, I wouldn't have done it like that. And whilst all of that gets resolved in an organization, as you say, the boat could sail and the opportunity in the moment is lost. I think you make a really interesting point around leaders having been through that phase of being good managers and having executed things well in the past. My observation from talking to lots of leaders now about their own organizations is that's disappearing within organizations. I've been talking about the projectification of leadership, but actually there's a projectification of management. So this is, if you like, that middle layer in organizations. Often the middle management, they've got teams and things they're reporting to, often senior people in the organization. But if they're overly obsessed with leadership and not with the execution piece, which we would associate with management and the doing, then actually that can be a problem, and it creates a vacuum of the very experience that you're talking about for people to then go on and be a great leader. So this is not just a problem now, but potentially we're creating a problem for the next generation of leaders as well, who don't have that background that you just talked about.
So there are two interesting points that you raised. One is the refinement of the vision itself. That is one of the reasons where if you don't refine it well, because the vision and the ideas are so out of the realms of possibilities, or they're just out there that it doesn't make sense. The second thing that you talked about is projectification of management and projectification of the workforce and leadership. I want to touch upon those two things, but let's talk about the first thing first, in the sense of, for a good vision to be realized, execution is important, but you're saying refinement of that idea is also important. Can you elaborate more on that?
Yeah, sure. If I think about some of the kind of project management tools and techniques, so one of the things we talk about in project management is benefits realization. So that's not just about delivering something on time within budget to the required specification. That's saying, let's look beyond that and say, once we've built this new CRM, it might be, or once we've delivered this new product or service, is it going to actually deliver on the vision that we expect it to? Is it going to deliver benefits to our customers, for example? And that's the bit that sometimes can get a bit lost, because everybody gets, if you like, obsessed about, we must just deliver this thing because the leader said we must. Who is it that's checking constantly throughout that actually the external landscape hasn't changed so much that the initial justification, that initial business case hasn't changed sufficiently that we need to change? Who is it that once the project is formally finished, who is it senior within the organization that then makes sure that new product or service actually is delivering on the benefits that we said it was going to do? These are both, the business case and the benefits realization are both formal aspects of project management. They fall within the kind of the full project life cycle. And if you took a more structured approach to leadership using those tools and techniques, that definitely would not get lost because the next big idea comes along, or because there are challenges in the workforce, or the external environment moves on. That would be captured, and the delivery aspect would evolve, the idea would evolve, and actually ultimately the benefits and the delivery of the benefits would evolve as well to make sure it did what it was set out to do.
And one of the things you mentioned is that the speed of change has only been increasing in the last couple of decades, and it's not getting better. It's only getting worse, if anything. People have to change so much faster now. So in your strategy, timeline becomes an important variable. What might be true today in terms of benefit realization of that initiative may not be true if your project doesn't get done on time. And even if it does get on time, your benefit realization that you thought it would be may not be the same because some other competitor came into place, or some laws changed, or the environment changed. Maybe suddenly there was COVID or some other event that caused the change. Then you got to recalibrate again and then move your project and your vision maybe slightly differently so that you can still stay true to benefit realization. Can you talk a little bit about how does agility and ability to make changes as you go important in this as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's two layers to this. We've focused in our conversation so far about the kind of delivery aspect, which is the kind of project management piece. I think we're starting to touch now on what I would think of as project sponsorship. Outside of the project profession, we'd think of that as governance, corporate governance in an organization. And governance are often the layer of the organization that's going to make some of the decisions that you've talked about, the kind of go, no-go decisions, the kind of stage gate decisions about whether we continue. I think one of the things I've noticed is just in any organization, when I ask about corporate governance and project sponsorship, if I ask how many of those people who have those roles have had formal professional development or training to be effective in those roles, it's often the bit that's been missed out. So the delivery side of things, we've developed our workforce, we've made sure they're well qualified and so on. And when it comes to the governance, we just assume that because somebody's senior in an organization, they must know what good governance looks like. They must know how to make these go, no-go decisions. Do we cut this project dead because the landscape has changed? Or actually, is it that we need to double down and put more investment of resource into this because it's still all to play for, or something else? So for me, that's an important aspect here in terms of the practical delivery side of things. So yeah, it's the project delivery, but also the kind of corporate governance, the project sponsorship as well.
Yeah, I have a great example of this, right? If you went back 2 years ago, there were a lot of tools out there, companies out there building AI models. And a classic example is conversational intelligence, right? Where you have a discussion and then AI distills that down and comes up with action items and summaries of that discussion and sentiment analysis, things of this nature. There were a lot of companies building that. We looked into that as well. Hey, we should probably build that into our platform. And we started looking at different AI models. Some of the companies started hiring AI developers and started building those models. And then, wham, 6 months later, OpenAI comes out with this free tool, ChatGPT 3, and then ChatGPT 4, and then Gemini comes out from Google, and then Zoom has conversational intelligence built into it. And all these tools came out. So your project that you were spending probably hundreds of thousands of dollars or maybe millions is no longer relevant, because now you don't have a competitive advantage of delivering something that is now freely available for every other product and companies to use. So that's where, do you double down or do you cut? In my case, I would say I would cut it out and let's just use the free models. And whatever we did is sunk cost. Let's just forget about it and move on and get a tool that has already been proven and has a lot better resources behind it, like OpenAI or Gemini or Anthropic or whatever the other models that are out there. And that's the hard part for, I think, for a lot of executives and people today, is that the change is so fast that if you take up too much time to deliver something to market, the value of that is completely gone by the time you deliver that to the market. And you need to know that and move fast enough to do that. And so that's what the agility aspect, I think, is even more important. And to have good project management governance gives you that agility, is what I would say. Because if you don't have that and you don't have good management teams be able to deliver that quickly, then you're not going to be able to move fast enough. Would you?
I'd agree with that. And just two reflections as you were talking there. So one about planning and one about risk. Planning, we have an expression in the project profession. We say projects don't go wrong, they start wrong. And what we mean by this is that the planning aspect is often the bit that people want to do fast, sometimes for the very reason you've described. Look, we need to move really quickly on this because other competitors could be coming into the market and so on. And actually that extra time spent in a planning phase to really assess who those other competitors are. Is there going to be a free version coming along? Is anybody likely to be working on this? Now, of course, you don't always know, but I think the more time spent on really understanding the kind of the planning aspect of things is going to save time and money inevitably later on. So I think that's the first thing. The second thing I'd just say on risk in many organizations is seen as a little bit of a kind of admin, a kind of albatross, if I call it that. It's something people feel they must do, probably because you know, governance and structures and so on, and leaders are going to ask for it. But are organizations using those risk registers and so on to really drive strategic decision making? For me, that's when you really get the best out of that approach. The example you've given there, where another organization comes in and offers the free AI tool, a really good approach to risk not only would have already identified that and the likelihood of that, but it would also have it predetermined what action or options the organization has should that risk materialize and become an issue. And so rather than it be a kind of crisis meeting where we say, oh no, Google's brought out Gemini and someone else has brought out ChatGPT, what should we do? You get the risk register out and you say, we know what our options are. We've already discussed this, if you like, when the sun was shining and we all had clear heads and it wasn't a crisis situation. And that, I think, helps to make much better decisions when things inevitably don't go as planned, because the reality is we live in a VUCA world. For those not familiar with VUCA, I'm sure you are: volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, which used to be for a minority of projects, but I suspect now it applies to almost every project just because the nature of the world.
It is. The speed of change sometimes can be dizzying for many leaders at this point, especially because things are moving so fast. The speed at which Microsoft had to move in the AI world is bewildering. A company that size moving that fast is not very common. IBM took years to move into PC world, right? Lost, obviously, lead in that process to some extent. And Google was late to the game on the AI game, even though they had all the right resources and the right power behind it. So it can be dizzying. And I think that's going to probably create problems to some extent with the project management profession, because if you really want to spend time assessing all the risk, and I'm just being a contrarian to some extent here, because if you spend too much time assessing it, you will lose the first mover advantage, if you will, or the second mover advantage. But I will add to your point is that maybe the risk is knowing that maybe we don't know all the risk, and that is hence a risk as well.
Yeah, I think that's true. On the AI thing specifically, a few observations. I think one, I think it's likely to change significantly again. I don't think what we're seeing now is necessarily the end product. And by the way, I think it could go backwards. And just to give you an example of why, because AI is not the only kind of show in town, as it were. We've also got sustainability, which is a huge international priority. And when there are reports coming out saying things like, for every 20 to 50 searches on ChatGPT, it takes the equivalent of 500 milliliters of water to cool the data center. You start to get to ask the questions about, is this something that we want the general public and the wider world just using? Is that a good use of our kind of natural resources? That debate hasn't been had yet. And so I think at some point we're going to see a kind of a clash, if you like, between the sustainability agenda and the AI agenda. And frankly, I suspect there's only one way that's going to go, and it's probably going to go the way of sustainability in the end. So I think that might be probably a different point of view than people maybe listening to this might think. But we haven't seen that kind of direct clash, if you like, between two big items like that.
The second topic that I want to touch upon, changing topics a minute here, is the projectification of the workforce and managers. Can you talk a little bit about what really do you mean by that, and why is that important?
Yeah, I suppose I've talked so far about leaders and managers and the fact that they should be operating more like project delivery because it will help them to deliver their strategic aims. But there are other aspects of the workforce more broadly which are becoming more projectified organically. And the projectification of the workforce is a good example of this. So what do I mean? If I look at young people, so I'm thinking of your Gen Y, Gen Z, very soon Gen Alpha as well, coming through into the workforce, and I look at what do they want from their employers. I think what they're not doing, and I recognize I'm generalizing here, but I think what we're not seeing at scale, at least, is those people coming into the workforce and saying, I would like to work for one organization for 30 years and start at a junior level and work my way up. Now, some people might do that, but I think the vast majority of young people I see coming into the workforce are saying, look, I don't know what I want to do. I might want to do several things during my career. So what I'll do is I'll commit to you to coming to work for you for, I don't know, 2 years, 3 years. I'll have a particular goal that I want to deliver while I'm here because I want to prove what I can do. I want to show you my skills and develop those skills. And then I might go off and do something different. And the reason I say this is a kind of projectification is because when we talk about projects, we talk about them having a defined kind of set of deliverables that they're going to be delivered within a particular time span. And this sounds very much like what these young people are doing when they come into a job. So they're not taking a job on to deliver business as usual. They're taking a job on to deliver a particular set of outcomes, to deliver a project, I would say. So there is this wider projectification of the workforce. And if we recognize that, then that gives, again, leaders an opportunity to invest the formal tools and techniques which are proven to work into the workforce more generally, and that will help them to make better hires. It will help them to make better use of the resources once these people are employed in the organization, and also help for better transition when those people exit and move on to their next role.
So you're basically saying we need to acknowledge and be honest about the fact that these people are going to exit at some point. When we hire somebody, at the time of hiring itself, we acknowledge that this is probably a 4-year hire. This is probably a 3-year hire. This is probably a 6-year hire, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Is that what you're talking about in that sense? Because we just need to be more honest about it and to not fool ourselves thinking that this person is going to be with us forever. And then the person fooling themselves think I'm going to be in this company forever.
I think that's an aspect of it, but I'm sure lots of listeners to this podcast, either who are being hired or are doing the hiring, would say, hey, hang on a minute, I am honest about this. I do this already. I think it goes beyond just the honesty, though. I think it's about then saying, once we know that this is some form of a project, can we actually deploy some of those tools and techniques? So let me return to the one I said about earlier on, benefits realization. So if I say this person's going to be with me for 3 years, is it just they do their 3 years and off they go and thanks very much? Or do we have a plan in place to make sure that the deliverables that this person leaves behind don't get lost when the person goes, and actually they get absorbed strategically by the organization and deployed in a way that delivers the benefits of that person having been in the organization for 3 years? That's the thing I'm talking about.
Are you suggesting that maybe in the offer letter, say this is a 3-year term of employment and we'll revisit towards the end of that term? Is that basically a suggestion?
Look, what I'm not doing is advocating for fixed term roles for every post. I think it's more saying that we have something here which we should acknowledge is a project. And by the way, although a project could be a fixed timescale and should be a fixed timescale, that's not the only thing that you might choose to fix. We talk about in the project world about something called the iron triangle, time, cost, quality. And you may choose to fix one of those because that's really important. You might choose to fix time because you've got a deadline to deliver a particular product to market, for example. But equally, it might be the cost. You've only got a certain amount of cash flow each year that you can spend. So the reason I'm saying that is it's not necessarily going to be known at the outset that this person is here for exactly 2 years or exactly 3 years. It might be we say, look, we've got a particular outcome we're going to achieve. I don't know if it's going to take you 3 years or 5 years or 8 years, but this is how much money you've got each year. Please move us closer to that. But at some point, this job is going to be done. And so we need to plan from the outset to bring those benefits into our business when you step away, whenever that might be.
Yeah, that's a good one. But how do you estimate how long this person is going to be there? That's going to be a hard one too. I guess you're saying the project might itself be only 2 years and then maybe it's just something else after that. Let's say you're bringing in a head of product development, right? because your product development needs somebody to manage it effectively and innovate and things like that. And you, in your head, you might be thinking that's like probably a 2-year effort because I fell behind my competitors. I need a new product out to market and make it successful as a 2-year project. So you really need to think about in those terms. Is that what you're basically saying?
Exactly. And by the way, I'm not saying the person has to leave after the 2 years. It's entirely possible that they take on another project within the organization. It's entirely possible they get promoted or move to a different part of the organization. It's not so much about the person as it is about the thing that they're working on.
Yes.
So I think we need to distinguish between those two.
Yes. So the project in this case is that I have 2 years to figure out how to come and win this market. Otherwise, I'm going to have to close shop. For example, an example would be Ford, right? Ford tried to grow in India and couldn't, and they closed shops. Ford doesn't exist in India anymore. They shut shop. They realized they couldn't compete with the Japanese and Korean manufacturers and local Indian manufacturers as well. But if you were Ford and say, I have 2 years to figure this out, otherwise I'm going to have to shut shop. And so you hire a product manager with that mindset to say, okay, let's just go and figure this out. And if we can't, but if we do, then that project is over. We can move on to another project.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think actually we're touching on another potential consequence of this type of thinking, which does need to be thought about by organizations, which is this idea of strategic misrepresentation and also watermelon reporting. If you say to somebody, look, your whole job is about delivering X, whatever X is, when X is going badly, what's the incentive for that person to be really honest and say, look, things aren't going well? And that might not be a performance issue, by the way. It could be, as we talked about before, external landscape and all kinds of things going on. But we need to make sure that we don't inadvertently take an approach here where the person tells you everything's green, if you like, on your RAG status, but it's actually red on the inside. This is what I mean by watermelon reporting. You want to make sure that they can be honest about that without fear that we're going to say, okay, that's the end of the project then because we don't need you anymore, you're off. So I think there's a piece here around organizational culture and creating that Google talks about psychological safety, for example. I think that's an aspect of this. So we need to be clear about the project. We need to have organizational clarity about the expectations. But also we need to have a culture where we can be honest when things aren't working, pull the plug if we need to. That doesn't necessarily mean the person's going to lose their job, but it may mean they're going to be working on a different project.
Yes, we need to separate the person from the project to some extent, because a lot of things are circumstantial. You could, like in the case of AI, you could have the best product teams working on this AI conversational intelligence, but all these other AI tools come, your project is now destined for failure. For no fault of anyone, right?
Yeah, absolutely. But the other thing is, as soon as we talked about a product development kind of manager before, but as soon as you know that the thing they're delivering is going to be something akin to a project, it also makes you think differently about, for example, how you develop your workforce and what you invest in. So rather than only developing them in the area of knowledge and skills around product management, you might also say actually they need some development around project management, and you'd say maybe they need to have some qualifications in that area as well as the specialist kind of domain that they're operating in as well. In the same way that there's a basic level of expectation for leaders I talked about earlier on, we'd want them to understand HR, marketing, finance. Actually, I would say we want all leaders to also understand project management and project delivery, because that will help them. But unless we formally recognize that in a strategic sense in our organization, that's always going to be left to the side, and the whole organization and the individuals within it suffer as a result.
Yeah. And I think going back to your original discussion point about leaders taking a project management mindset, it becomes important from that perspective. Because if they don't have those skills, they become leaders with no realistic concept of what actually it is to execute using effective project management techniques.
Effectively, they set up the organization to fail in that situation.
Excellent. Adam, it's been a pleasure chatting with you. I could talk about this for hours. I did get my PMP certification back in the day, and I was a project manager, so I can relate to a lot of this in my own career. But this has been a very insightful discussion, very unique one, having this project management approach to work, leadership, and strategy execution. So thank you.
No, thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Sri Chellappa here. Thank you so much for listening to the People Strategy Leaders podcast. If you are a successful leader or a people strategist who would like to be on this program, please visit engagedly.com/People Strategy Leaders Podcast. If you got something out of this interview, would you share this episode on social media? If you know someone that would be a great guest, tag them on social media to let them know about the show and include the hashtag People Strategy Leaders. I love seeing your posts and guest suggestions. We are regularly putting out new episodes and content. To make sure you don't miss any episodes, go ahead and subscribe. Your thumbs up, ratings, and reviews go a long way to help promote the show and mean a lot to me and my team. Want to know more? Follow me on LinkedIn and Twitter at Sri Chellappa. Thanks for listening. We will see you next time. And thank you to Patrick Ramsey, sound engineer at Kalinga Production Studios, for recording and mixing this show.